everyone. This video is the companion to the Heritage Overalls instructions, and it's meant to sort of supplement the instructions for those of you who are a little bit more visual, and I'm hoping it will encourage anybody who's a little bit intimidated by the process of sewing overalls into just going for it. So in the video, I'm not doing a full tutorial, a full sew along of every step of the pattern, but I do go over any step that might be a little bit tricky or difficult. And I hope that by watching the video, you'll get a sense that there's actually not that much in the pattern that's super difficult. And I hope that it will encourage you to tackle this project with more confidence. And if there's anything that's not totally making sense in the instructions, or that you feel like you need a little bit of extra help on, I hope the video will help you out there. So I'll be jumping around in the different sections of the video, and I'm going to outline in the caption the sort of timestamps for where I'm going over each different section. But basically I'll go over any of the more complicated construction. I give a few different tips and tricks throughout the video, and just kind of touch base on the different elements of the project that you might need to know a little bit more information about, or that you might want to know a little bit more information about. All right, so thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think after you've watched the tutorial, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna do when you start making your Heritage overalls is do a little prep of all of your pieces. So that's what I have here, and these are the first steps in the pattern. You'll be folding pockets and sewing them down, and you'll be pressing the pockets so that they're ready to pin to your pant, and pressing seam allowances at the top of waistbands. And this is not usually the typical order that things go in. Usually in a pattern, you'll do kind of like one step at a time, one pattern piece at a time. But I have this pattern set up so that it's the most efficient possible, so that you can go from the machine to the ironing board and back as few times as you need to. So when you go to get started, the first thing you'll do is go through all of your pieces, get everything ready to go, and that's where we're at right now. Do you know this trick for getting really nicely pressed, rounded corners on a pocket? I have my back pockets here, my bib pocket, and my front pockets on my overalls. And the round corners, if you try to press them, are really tricky to do. So what I've done is I've sewn them together, right sides together, basted them. Now I'm gonna flip them right sides out, and I'm gonna make this as smooth as I can. Around the edge, I'm just doing it really quick to show you. And then I'm gonna press it nice and flat. And once they're very nicely pressed and you have the seam right along the edge all the way around and it's looking good, this isn't looking amazing, I need to fix it a little bit, but once it's nice and perfect around the edges, you just go in and rip the stitches out, and then you have a beautifully pressed pocket without agonizing over the corners. Okay, so it's time for me to baste down the edge of my bib here so that I can easily sew it from the right side with my top stitching thread. So I have I've sewn the facing, I've pressed it down, I've pressed the sides in by 1/2 inch on each side, and you can see that they're folded nicely. So from the right side, other than my marker, you don't have anything showing from the back. So that's all looking great, and I've threaded my machine with some contrasting thread. So I have I'm just using leftover thread, so I have some leftover burgundy thread on a bobbin here, and I have some leftover green thread up at the top, just because I don't need either of these and I'd like to use them up. And I've got my stitch length set to the longest possible setting, and I'm ready to sew along the edge here. And I'm gonna go as close to the edge as possible. messy, so I'm falling off the edge a little bit, but that's okay. I'm gonna turn and pivot right at the edge of my facing here, and I'm a little bit off, so I'm just gonna pick up the needle and drop it exactly where I want it. Since this is just a basting thread, it doesn't really need to be perfect. You just need to have a good guide to use on the other side. We're not going to backstitch. Now, this is what we have from the right side, and as you can see, it's not perfect. I got a little bit wonky where I fell off the side because I was looking at the video recording instead of looking at what I was sewing, and I went a bit too far here, and whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm going to correct for that when I do my top stitching. I'm going to go just inside the line, and by inside I mean actually closer to the outside here, because I sewed as close as possible to this edge, and so hopefully if I go just inside the line I'll end up around like 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around. So this is where we're at now. We've got the bib all sewn, or we've got the top stitching done. I took out the basting stitches all the way around, and I've sewn the pocket on as well. Excuse all the marker mess, that'll wash out nicely when I'm done. But I attached the pocket where it was supposed to go using the dots and the corners of my pocket, and then I, lining up the centers so that it was nice and centered, nothing got off when I was, making my markings for my projection. And then I went all the way around the edge stitched, then pivoted at the corner, went 1/4 inch or so, went back down all the way around, up, and finished there. And then I did the same thing on my front pant, which I added the double front to. So I started up at the top here, edge stitched all the way around, there's a piece of lint, down along the bottom, all the way up the side, pivoted here. You might want to mark 1/4 inch here because it's a little bit harder to tell when you have the angle. Sewed back down, all the way around, same deal, the corners up, and then I just sewed close to the edge up here too, so that my pocket won't be flapping around as I'm sewing later. Then I used the bottom of one of my pocket pieces. I decided I wanted to trace, or I wanted to have a curved shape that marked where my pocket ended, so I traced the bottom of the pocket piece and just did 2 lines of stitching there. And then I did the same deal with my back pocket, right? Pretty simple, I think. Just edge stitching around, pivoting, stitching, yada yada. What I've also done in these pieces is gone ahead and attached my my facing, my button facing, and my button extension. So I have those attached there, stopped sewing at the dot, and I will show you now how you finish these edges separately and all the clipping and all that. But this will be done for all of your pants. I have all 4 pieces here that are sewn down to the dot. This next part also seems a little bit trickier than it actually is. But what I want to do is I'm going to finish my edges either with a serger or a zigzag, but I'm going to do it in 2 different steps divided by this snip. Okay, so the first section that gets serged together is going to be the top of the pant above the snip, right there, serged to the button facing, just like this, right along the edge. Okay, so let's do that. And to do this, I'm just gonna hold the pant out of the way when I get done. And you want to go careful so that you don't snip something with your knife here that you don't want to. But I just, see how I just tucked the pant under? And I just go through. Oh, I gotta grab my scissors. All right, so that's nicely finished together, see? Now I'll just fold that top part out of the way and serge the second part. And I could go from the other side too, from the bottom, if that's easier, if you've got it sort of bulky. I'm not trimming anything off, except for some of these really loose little bits here. I'm not cutting any of my wigs off All right, just like that, easy peasy. You're going to do the same thing on all pant pieces. So you can see I have my nice neat piece right there that's got the facing serged to the pant front above the snip, and the pant below the snip serged separately. And I like to do this so that I don't serge it all in one piece and then have to snip through my serging, making it weaker, making it more prone to unraveling. I think this just is a lot tidier. And here's another view, what it looks like from the back. Might be a little bit easier from the back to see. Voila. We're going to match the front pant to the back pant at the side seam. And to make sure that everything is nicely lined up, I'm going to start matching up my button facing and button placket. So when this is all finished, we want to make sure that our corners at the top and the seams here at the edges, this edge and this edge, are basically perfectly aligned. So when it comes to lining up my side seam, to make sure that you can get a really crisp finish, this is a great place to start. So I'll have it lined up right at the top, and I'm going to just clip that in place up there. Okay, make sure that everything's lined up really nicely right here, and then that goes right into the rest of my side seam very nicely right here. Clip that right there. Now, something that came up in testing that is best practice whenever you're securing any pieces to each other, especially if there aren't notches along seam, is you want to make sure that you're matching up the outsides and kind of like working in, because if I were to just pin all the way down, it would be easy for me to end up with a little misalignment here. Even though these pieces are the correct lengths, fabric warps, it's flexible. That's what makes it great for clothing. But it's easy to warp things, and then you would end up having you know, a twisted leg or something unpleasant. So you want to make sure that you're matching everything nicely. So I matched the top. Now I'm going to go down and match the bottom. And you can see that there's a little bit of gaping here. And that's just because it's flexible fabric. So I'm going to just pick it up and snap it about a little bit, shake it out, and that helps me smooth everything over. I'm just going to make sure that my seam is lining up really nicely, and you just kind of like fiddle with it a little bit there. There, now everything's laying really flat, really smooth, and I'll just go in and clip a few extra clips in there, and then add as many as makes you comfortable all along the side seam. So this is maybe one of the parts that people might find a little bit tricky, and I just want to show you what it looks like from the right side and the wrong side. So I have my side seams all clipped. I clipped at the bottom, I clipped underneath here and at the top, and I made sure, it's really hard to see on this striped fabric, but I made sure the edge of my seam here was lining up with the edge of my seam here perfectly. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is sew up to this point that I've marked, which is just above, about a 1/4 inch above the snip. And I just wanna show you what it looks like in the stack here. So I've got my seam allowance pressed towards my facing, which is pressed away from the pant on this side. And then on this side, you can see that the button extension is basically laying flat. So the seam allowance and the seam allowance of both pieces here is pressed towards the pant, and the button facing is pressed away from the pant. And that's gonna make it a little bit less bulky to sew up the side seam to this spot. So on this side, I'm gonna be sewing up from the hem as well, and I need it flipped on the other side to go through my machine. So I've marked right here where my stop point is going to be, and I'm just gonna stick a pin through it because the dot is in a different spot on the button facing than on the button extension. So I stuck a pin through it so that I can see where it is on the other side, and then I'm just gonna mark it there. Now I have it pressed here, flat. So from the back, this is what it looks like. The seam allowance is pressed towards the front pant. The seam allowance of the button extension is pressed towards the back pant. Button extension goes towards the front pant, and the button facing folds back onto the front pant, like so. And from the front, looks like this. Here's how you can transfer your buttonhole markings from your button facing to the front pant, because you're going to be sewing them from the front side. I just take a pin and mark poke it in straight down at the end, and then poke it back through right at the other edge. And then after I've marked both of them, I just flip it over and mark right where the pin comes out. And then you can use a straight edge to connect them, or you can just trace along the pin. Such a mess. And then you have your buttonhole markings transferred. All right, so we sewed the side seam and did our top stitching. This is what it looks like from the inside. And you can see that I'm using my bobbin thread is the same color as my fabric. And now if I flip it over to the outside, you can see that I've sewn right up the side seam, which is tacking down the seam allowance on the inside to that front pant. And then I have finished with a little bar tack up here. I also decided to do my buttonholes now because I know that when I get towards the end of the project, I hate making my buttonholes, and I just thought I would do myself a little favor and get them out of the way. So when it came to determining where to stop with my top stitching, which is like a little bit crooked here, which is gonna annoy me, but I just kind of folded back my facing here and saw the point where it was separating, and then just stitched. I marked that point with red here and then just stitched right up to it so that I'm not losing any of that opening, but also so that those stitches don't come undone. Yeah. So now when it comes time to match up the inseam, I'm going to just fold it over like this. And this is important for all pant patterns basically, is if you don't have any notches, I like minimal notches on my pants patterns, but if you don't have any notches, you want to make sure that you are matching up the top part of the inseam, okay, at the crotch curve here, matching up the pant leg, and then going from there inward. Typically, you'll have the legs of the front and the back will be the same length up to the knee, and there won't be any variation, but the back pant and the front pant curve as they curve up towards the crotch. They're quite different shapes above the knee. Below the knee, it's just a straight line. Above the knee, you can see they're different shapes. And because they're cut at an angle here, it gets pretty close to the selvage, sorry, not the selvage, the bias. And so it can stretch pretty easily. And you can really easily warp your fabric if you start matching just at the inseam here, or at the crotch here, and just start matching. You can really like stretch things out and then have things not line up once you get to your hem. So you want to make sure you're matching the hem and the top near the crotch of the pant, and then kind of going in towards the center from there, and you'll make sure you don't have any weird warping or twisting of your leg. Like so. All right, we'll stitch it up. I'm going to show you how to attach the waistbands now. So this is my back waistband piece, and the top edge is pressed. We did that way at the beginning. And then I went in and I marked 1/2 inch from the edge because that's how much I needed to overhang. So I did that on each side. It'll just make it easier to line up. So you're gonna go, and I have my center marked as well. I cut on a projector, so I just drew the whole center line, but there's also a notch in the pattern for the center, so you could just mark the center notch. And I'm gonna line that up to my center seam. You wanna make sure you're lining it up to the center seam, not to the stitching, top stitching. And I'm gonna clip that there. And then before I clip anything else, I'm going to match my overhang to the edge here. And I'm going to clip that in place as well. Now in between, I am just going to secure it here. You can see that there's like some sort of gaping, and I mean, these are different shapes right now. This is a straight edge, this is a curve, and in order for them to fit nicely, sorry, I bumped the camera there, you just have to manipulate it a tiny bit. So I'm just gonna hold it with my hand and kind of make sure that it's gently curving nicely against the edge there. Make a mark over or put a clip over the dart. And I put a clip over the dart so that in the direction that it's pressed, so that it doesn't get pushed in the wrong direction when I'm sewing it. And then I'll clip it there. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So I sewed the first back waistband down, and this seam allowance is sewn at 3/8, and the reason is so that when we sew our next seam allowance at 1/2 inch, we don't have to worry about having an extra seam line showing up if you're just like a little bit off. Sewing it at 3/8 means that everything's in place, nothing's going to shift, but then you'll have a nice clean finish after. Here's my bib, and I did the same thing where I matched my center notch, and then I didn't like stretch anything and just matched it out to the edges, and it's nicely pressed flat. And like the instructions say, I keep pressing even past the bib because you'll see later. So now I'm going to attach this to my front pant in the exact same way that I did the back waistband. I'm going to mark the edges so that I have 1/2 inch overlap, match the center, match the overlap, and then fill in the gaps. For your back pieces, you're going to match this inside corner here to your notch. I have my notches marked twice just because I made a mistake the first time, so don't mind me. You should only have one notch on either side here. Match the corner, and then you're going to line up the bottom with the seam allowance as it's folded over. And now I suggest you safety pin this in place. Safety pin it here, here, safety pin it shut. I also have a safety pin holding the crossover here shut. And then try it on and see how it's working for you, and assess if you think you need any adjustments to the angle, to the tilt, anything like that. I've already done that, so I'm going to go right on to sewing my back pieces together. But you're going to want to try that on, and then you might need a partner to kind of help you adjust things a little bit if they need adjusting. My overalls are done, all except for my hardware. So I'm going to show you how to install that. And I've actually washed them too, because I knew I needed to wash all the marker and everything off, and I wanted to do it before I had the hardware on, clinking around in the wash. So I've got some beautiful bar tacks and top stitching on my back pieces here. I did 1 line of top stitching around my waistbands. You can do 2 or 1, or however many you want, but I wanted to do 1 this time. So I'm going to show you a little trick for buttons and also for opening your buttonholes if you haven't done it yet. So we've got 6 buttonholes here, and I know that especially if you're a beginner, opening up some buttonholes can be scary, especially it's the end of your project. You've got your overalls all ready to go. They're beautiful. You don't want to ruin anything. So what I do is I use a seam ripper to open them, and I've had excellent luck doing this. And I'm going to show you an additional kind of trick if you are extra nervous. But let's start with this one. The one on the waistband's a little bit thicker. Also, how pretty is this light coming through my window this morning? So what I do is I just pop the sharp end of the seam ripper in right underneath the end of the buttonhole. And I'm going to rip just towards the middle. I don't want to go past the middle. I don't want to accidentally rip too far. All right, now I'm just going to go from the other side. And this is like really thick right here because there's multiple layers. But got through it, no problem. And you know, there's going to be some fraying at the buttonholes. You can put some fray check on that if you want. I never do. I just kind of like let it fray as much as it's going to, and then just kind of trim it as it frays. Another trick that you can do is you can pop a pin right here at the end of your buttonhole so that, ooh, stabbed myself, so that you can't go past the stitching by mistake. And, you know, that's fine. I kind of like going in the other direction better because I feel like I get a little bit more control, but whatever makes you comfortable. Like I said, I know that some beginners find this scary. Even I find it scary sometimes if, you know, if I've been working on a project for a long time. And this is a step that I never do when I'm like tired. Like I finished these overalls yesterday. I washed them. I could have done all this last night, but I waited until this morning when I was refreshed. I've started working on my coffee here. And I don't like to do essential steps when I'm tired or if I'm like getting kind of like sick of working on something, if it's been a while. I've been working on these over the course of several days because I've been working and doing other things pattern related, so it's been taking me a little bit to get through them, and that's fine. Sometimes a project is not just a one and done. All right, buttonholes are open. To mark the position of your buttons, you're going to use your buttonholes. That way you know everything's going to line up nicely. So I am going to use this seam here that the button extension comes off of as my guide, and I want my front pant to line up really nicely with that seam there. So there's a slight curve to this seam, so sometimes, you know, it's a little bit, when you have it laying flat and it's not on the body, it's a little bit harder to make it line up perfectly, but I've got that pretty good. Okay, and I'm going to use a pencil, and I use a pencil just because it has like a finer point. And I want you to think about where your button is going to actually sit within the buttonhole. I think the most straightforward thing sometimes is to think like, oh, I want it to go right in the middle. But if you think about it, when it's on your body and you have your button in your buttonhole, it's not going to sit right in the middle. The shank is going to pull all the way over to the side. As you're wearing it, it's going to pull this way, right? Pull this way. So that means your button is going to be closer to the edge here. Now these are a fresh buttonhole and this is a pretty thick shank, so it's, you know, not going to be super far off center. But just FYI, if you ever feel like your buttons are like perfectly lined up and then later they're shifting and you don't quite understand why they're not lining up perfectly, it could just be because as worn, the button doesn't sit perfectly centered in the buttonhole. It pulls to one side. So I'm going to mark off to the side here because I don't really want this seam to be super obvious or visible when worn. So I'm going to mark right there, right there. Oh, can't really see. Right, I'm marking right at the edge of the button. And then right here. Now, here's another trick for anybody who's scared of ruining their project or not being happy with it. Jeans buttons or any sort of tack buttons are pretty much permanent. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to remove them, but you would have to get these spikes out of your pants somehow using pliers or whatever. And that is not easy, and you could easily rip your pant or have some sort of issue. I do this with every pair of pants that I make, this trick that I'm about to tell you. And you can do it with your overalls too if you're not 100% sure on the button placement. Maybe you're worried that you need a little bit of extra wiggle room and you want to shift them over like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, whatever. What I like to do is just sew on some temporary buttons, at least for my first wear. If I'm making a pair of pants or something, I will sew a button here on my placement, make sure that it's 100% right. And then after I've worn it for a while, if I decide that I don't want to move it at all, I'll just rip it off and put my jeans button in. But that way you know for sure that everything is good to go, and you don't have to worry about not being able to move that button after the fact. Okay, a couple of you have asked for a tutorial on installing jeans buttons because you're nervous about it. And I'll just show you really quick on a scrap here. It's super easy. It's honestly easier than installing a regular button. All you have to do is whack it with a hammer. So you'll take your, once you have your location marked on your fabric, obviously this would be on your finished garment, but I'm gonna just show you here on a little swatch. I have this, this is actually from bookmaking, and it will just help me poke a hole in the fabric. You don't need one of these. You can just poke the tack through, or use whatever other random item to poke a hole if you need to. But you can, you'll poke the button through the wrong side where you need to go. See, it's a little bit hard because it's kind of thick to get it through. So I'm going to poke through with my awl and see how I kind of like have separated the strands there so that I can poke it through. Now it's coming through on the other side. All right, and then I have my button here, and I'm going to I use a cast iron pan as an anvil. You can do this on a concrete surface. I think cast iron pans are great. You don't want to do it on a table or something. You don't want to hammer, and you don't want your surface to move around a lot. So I have the button face down. If you're worried about your button getting scratched, you can put like a piece of fabric down so that it doesn't get scratched. Then I have it lined up here, and I'm just going to give it a little tap to make sure that it's lined up correctly. And then you just give it a couple real good whacks, and there, it's through. Easy peasy. And you're gonna want to practice on a couple swatches to make sure that like how many times you have to hit it, and you want to investigate and make sure it's nice and secure. But these are just some cheap jeans buttons from Wawak. I've had good luck with them, and that's how they go in. And I'll show you, I have some fancier denim hardware, I'll show you that too, but it's the same deal. So I also have these donut style buttons from Citron denim, and they have a special dye that you need to use. So if you buy these, it's a Japanese website, you have to make sure that you have the dye that will help you set them in place. But it's the exact same premise of you have a tack. This tack is 2 prongs instead of 1. Push it through. These are sharper, so they're a little bit easier to get through. And then you line up your holes, tuck them right in, and then use the dye, put the dye in place. Voila. Easy, no fuss. To thread on your hardware, it's pretty simple. I'm showing it as if you have a regular slider, any kind of slider, and then just a buckle that slides on. But this should work with multiple forms of hardware. But if not, you'll have to play around with it a little bit. So I put the slider on first. I'm going to slide this up a bit. And then I'm going to thread on my buckle like so, because it's going to come down, fold down this way, and then my buckle will latch on. So this is the top side of my strap. Okay, so after I've done that, I'm going to pull up a big gap over the buckle because I need room so that I can thread my end here back through. So now I'm going to tuck it underneath this bar and kind of follow the path that I made and go back under the bar. So now I'm gonna try my overalls on and fiddle around with these so that I can determine exactly where I want everything, how much adjustability I want, where I want the buckle to show. Do I want it to be closer to the end here in the front? Do I want it to be higher up on my shoulder? Mess around with that, and then I'll show you what to do after you've figured out your placement. Okay, so I have tried on my overalls and I have my sliders and buckles in place where I want them, and I've measured everything just to make sure that they're symmetrical, because when you're trying them on it could be a little bit off. So I have that measurement, and then I went in and I marked right here at this overlap here, and just to determine where I want to cut this off, since I need to sew this piece to this so that it will move up and down, I measured that, and you can choose how much you want here. I think if you make it too short, it will be hard to fit into the machine. I'm gonna give myself, let's say, 1.5 inches of room. So I've got my ruler upside down. Oh my God. Okay. Like 1.5 inches. That's kind of a lot. Maybe I'll do 1 inch. Let's do 1.25 inches. And I'll do the same over here. All right, and I'm gonna trim it down, and I'll show you that in a sec. We want to finish the raw edge on our strap, and to do that I'm going to use my sewing machine and do a wide zigzag instead of serging it, because when I'm using my serger, I find that on a short distance the serging can come unraveled really easily, and then I think it just it'll end up looking sloppy. So I'm going to just do a zigzag. I can back stitch at the beginning and the end and get a really neat finish, and I'm going to be using just the same thread color as my fabric so it doesn't stand out, and I think that gives a really nice finish. I'm going to sew close to the raw edge here, back stitch good at the beginning. I'm going very close to the raw edge. All right, beautiful. And I'll trim off the excess there, or trim off these little threads, but you can see that I think is going to look a lot nicer, and really just not be noticeable compared to a serging finish. And then my ends aren't going to unravel, and I can just get whatever is going to unravel now and then trim it off so that it's not going to show. This is going to be tucked up underneath the rest of your strap anyway, but I just don't want a bunch of loose serger thread everywhere. So the settings I did on my machine, you can play around with what you think will look best, but I did a length of 1 and a width of 5. The last thing that I need to do is sew this edge that we just finished down to this other loop in my strap. So we have my strap, we have the main outer section, and then the sort of inside section needs to get sewn together, because this is what this bar is hooked to, and that allows you to do your slider so you can move it up or down. So this is going to be a little bit fiddly, which is why we left it at a decent length so that you can fit it under your machine. But you're just going to hold that down there. You can pin it in place and just stitch along the edge, close to the edge, like a 1/4 inch from the edge, so that it holds it down. So I hope that that was helpful to any of you who needed the extra help or who just wanted a little sewing buddy during your project. Please let me know in the comments what you think. As I'm sure you can tell, I am not a content creator. This is not my thing, but I do want to make the pattern as accessible as possible, and I think that hopefully you'll be able to see through watching me do these different steps that the pattern isn't actually that difficult, And hopefully those of you who are feeling a little bit intimidated feel a little bit more confident now going forward with your project. But please do reach out, let me know, tag me in your posts. I want to see your heritage overalls. I want to see what you're doing when you're wearing them. I want to see your hacks. Please let me know if you have any questions, whether that's about fit, about adjustments, about the process itself. I'm happy to answer any questions. I always love chatting with you all. So drop any comments, feedback, whatever in the comments, or send me a DM. And yeah, I hope that you have a great time sewing your overalls.